On June 1st of this year, LEGO launched the highly anticipated Luxo Junior construction set, bringing to life the iconic sentient household decoration. As someone who is a lifelong fan of Pixar and LEGO, I think it's incredibly exciting to see such a product, especially as the design seems as though it's a near-perfect translation. The release of this set inspired me to do a whole video on the themes, sub-themes, and sets that have been released utilizing Pixar's brands, since it goes back quite some time now, and I'd also like to take a forward look into where it may go in the future. I will add as well, I think I'm in a good position to talk about a lot of the LEGO group and how they operate. Not as much as others, as with those prices, I've kind of sat back and watched a lot of these sets come and go. Some of these earlier ones though I did have back in the day, since I used to get LEGO sets a lot as a kid. But I will be taking a look at all of this from the viewpoint of a Pixar fan, as well as how they play into the overall culture of the company's purchasing base. This collaboration started off the way you'd expect with Toy Story. Kicking off the new year in 2010, LEGO released a few sets which were based on the first two movies. This was all in effort to remind the world of the franchise prior to Toy Story 3's June release. An interesting aspect of this line from LEGO was the custom molded heads given to most characters. Some think these were a little creepy, but I grew up on them and they helped to distance these from other sets. The theme felt and still feels pretty unique looking back all these years. For Woody and Jessie, they introduced these new taller minifigure legs and longer arms to match, which I think was a nice touch. They put in some good effort to work with the scale of the characters and this world. Some of it doesn't make much sense, but seeing Woody and Buzz next to each other with this height gap just feels correct. The Woody and Buzz with RC set just gives me so much nostalgia. It was the first of these I got, and the Green Army Men set just gave you the best bang for your buck back in the day. I'm really glad I had both of these. There was the big Build-A-Buzz and Zurg, and a Buzz spaceship, which kind of left the realm of the movies and more so going for brand recognition. And they also had the Woody's Roundup, which I always thought was fun. They started taking their own liberties here, but it made sense for the theme. I don't really think these sold as well as Disney maybe would have hoped, but I think they should have gone with some different picks in Wave 1. They were probably trying to use as little custom molds as possible up front, I'd say, since they did get a little crazy with the next one. With the following sets releasing in summer, there were a lot more that I personally got. The hype for Toy Story 3 was at an all-time high, which definitely helped. There were sets based on the train scene in the prologue of the film, as well as some very spoiler-filled settings with the garbage truck and even the trash compactor. The latter two really do give away so much of the ending. I remember seeing it before the film released, but being way too young to even connect the dots. I'd be pretty mad if I saw something like that with a new film, since I know LEGO has gotten themselves in trouble with this kind of thing quite a few times now. They introduced Ham and Rex into the line here, and they were always some of my favorite LEGO minifigures. It was wild seeing them at first, since it wasn't the kind of thing I remember LEGO doing too much back then. There was a smaller set of Lotso's dump truck, which was a nice addition since it was ripped right from the movie. Also having Stretch and Chunk in the set added a lot to the wide array of characters we already had. And they had one more set based on a previous entry in the franchise with the Pizza Planet truck, which was everything you could want. On the big screen, we got to see some LEGO, which makes this collaboration a lot more fun, as some minifigures showed up at Sunnyside, and they'd be in later Toy Story projects as well. The Toy Story theme essentially ended at this point, which was a shame since they easily could have done more sets based on all three of the movies. But it did have a lasting impact with the dozen or so sets they did produce, as well as some Duplo. Can't forget to add that, they're going for all ages here. Toy Story would eventually make a resurgence with LEGO, but I'll get to that later. I do want to add that one of the more unfortunate facets of this theme were the restrictions in some character uses. Because of different toy companies and licensing, the likes of Slinky Dog, Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head, and Barbie and Ken couldn't be used. This isn't unheard of for Toy Story, it's happened with basically every line of toys they put out for the franchise, though other companies have been more willing to work with LEGO in the past few years, with Transformers sets being a prime example. Pun intended. One major reason Toy Story didn't see continuous releases for the years to come was the LEGO Group's quick pivot to the Cars franchise, with 2011's release of Cars 2 right on the horizon, which is what the majority of these sets were based on. Just like with Toy Story, there were some Duplo sets produced, actually releasing in 2010 around the same time as Toy Story 3's line. And being a year out, each of these was based on the first film, and this was actually the only time they ever made a Doc Hudson, though they released quite a handful more Duplo sets the following year based on the sequel. Most of these Cars sets were released in summer of 2011, with a few stragglers in the beginning of 2012. Some of these were on the very inexpensive end, however, as there were a good amount that were just smaller builds of the characters in the same scale that they appeared in the larger sets. Speaking of said scale, they were made with about 30 pieces typically. They went a little lower or a little higher depending on the character. I know Mater had a little bit more than the rest. I feel like this was a pretty good scale for LEGO to do, being a tad bit bigger than the diecast of these same characters, and able to fit into the LEGO world as their own entities, as they were smaller than most minifigure-driven vehicles, highlighting the fact that they're characters in their own right. With how often LEGO has dipped into the well of racing, as well as selling everything with wheels in countless variations, it's surprising that they just got to this franchise at this point. They even had multiple scales within the line, as they went with a bigger model of Lightning McQueen, Mater, and Francesco Bernoulli, which they labeled as the ultimate builds. They all had a bit more detail, but they weren't that much bigger, being priced at $30 each. I think Francesco easily works the best here since his design is a lot simpler and the dimensions are the most well-rounded. One of the sets I'd specifically like to talk about here from the line is the Flo's V8 Cafe. It's one of the only full sets that is based on the first movie, that and the Max set, though both could technically work for both films. It's really only the paint jobs that allow you to decipher. This is a standout set in the line though. It gives you a good amount of characters in an iconic location. I'm super surprised they didn't make a few more Radiator Springs locations so they could at least round out the rest of the townies. And I feel like Cars fans and builders alike would like that kind of display piece, but I suppose that brings me to another major point, being that I don't feel like this line sold all that well. I really just remember seeing these sets all over the shelves for a while. Maybe they just overproduced because of the insane revenue the first film brought in merchandise-wise, but I think it's more likely that consumers opted for the more traditional avenues for merchandise from this franchise by the time the second film rolled around. Which is a shame, though I certainly do fall in that boat personally. They did put their best foot forward with cheaper sets that came with a few characters. They allowed you to build up your collection of cars rather quickly, which is what most would be looking for here. But it's difficult when for a lot cheaper you could get a lot more from the likes of Mattel. Continuing on, in 2012, LEGO introduced their newest line, attempting to attract a much more underdeveloped market segment for them, with LEGO Friends, which became highly successful with young girls. They opted out of the classic minifigure design for this theme, instead using the new mini doll, which kind of resembles a LEGO Polly Pocket. Any subsequent sets which LEGO aimed towards girls then utilized these pieces, with Disney Princesses being among the first licenses to utilize these designs. Brave received a set in this line in 2014, so not too long after the film's release, and it's a smaller set, attempting to do maybe a little too much for its cost, but considering there wouldn't be another exclusively Brave set again, I get it. I do like how the triplets show up in their baby bear form. Their translation is probably only as good because they have to line up with the mini doll Merida, who I don't think translated as well as maybe some other princesses. A few movie releases came and went with no tie-in LEGO sets, though through the LEGO Ideas program, we saw the release of WALL-E in 2015. This was a submission on LEGO Ideas, which is where the aforementioned Luxo Jr. set originated from as of late. On this site, they need 10,000 supporters, and there's now a deeply competitive round of review every few months. WALL-E was actually built by Pixar veteran Angus MacLean, who was with the company at the time of approval, actually going on to co-direct Finding Dory and direct Lightyear. This ended up being kind of a quintessential LEGO Ideas set. It's a great display of something iconic, and it comes from an IP LEGO hadn't covered by that point, which I think is one of the key selling points for an Ideas release. I'm a little bummed I missed this set upon release, though there might be a silver lining there, which I'll get to in a bit. One fun fact about WALL-E here was that LEGO had to provide an update to his neck because he was a little too top-heavy. It is also of note that this is the first LEGO Pixar release which targeted an older demographic, as it isn't a playset and it really could be seen as more of that display piece. Being marked at 12+, which I know isn't much older, but really it does make a difference with things like build quality in mind. Which perfectly segues into the next set of releases, Cars 3, but just a year before that, in their collectible minifigures line, LEGO released a set of 18 minifigures, which were all Disney characters. This collection saw 4 Pixar minifigures with a new version of the Toy Story Alien, which is only slightly different from the 2010 one, and a new Buzz Lightyear, which did away with the molded head. This had some mixed reactions, in which I'll get to in a bit. I think with the level of printing we got, he looks pretty good. We also got Mr. Incredible and Syndrome for the first time, which were great additions, both of which display franchises LEGO would intend to work with in the future, unsurprisingly, with sequels on the horizon. And yep, as mentioned earlier, LEGO dipped back into the Cars well, which really isn't surprising, but unfortunately took out what many believed worked best for the line in its character designs. as these were released under the sub-theme of Juniors, which wasn't around the time Cars 2 rolled out. These sets are branded as the name suggests, for younger builders, leading to far less complicated builds, and thus lower quality sets in the eyes of your older collectors. To my understanding, it's kind of meant to be a midway point between Duplo and the standard construction sets we're used to, only marketed as up to ages 7 or 8. I don't knock them for attempting something different here necessarily. Duplo is still getting pumped out for this movie as well, and perhaps studies showed which ages were interested in this product. I saw some outrage from the wider LEGO community, though they surely may have been the vocal minority. I just look at these sets and it's crazy seeing how much they differ from their counterparts. And while the Cars franchise audience does notably skew younger, it isn't the whole fan base, especially as many who grew up with it still continue to support it. So I feel like they should have done at least a couple stronger offerings for them. The biggest set in this line also spoiled the fabulous Lightning McQueen paint job for me, but they may have based this Florida 500 set off the alternate ending. If you don't know anything about that, boy do I have the video for you. One could make the argument for Cars fitting in perfectly with the Juniors line, but the following year we saw the Incredibles put in the same situation, as Incredibles 2 sets hit shelves. Unlike with Cars, we never got any sets to capture this franchise prior, thus any to compare them to, which is a shame. And they oddly didn't even go back to make an Omnidroid set or any from the first movie even in this Juniors line. While I do obviously think as full standard releases the handful of sets they did make would be a lot better, I do think they chose some good ideas for what they decided to base sets off of for this second movie. The minifigure selection is a bit odd. We got the whole main family, obviously, dispersed amongst the sets. Jack is bald, but that's fine, and Elastigirl gets those long stretchy arms that Miss Marvel had in one of the Marvel sets, which looks absolutely bonkers but makes sense for the character and the power set. They had a Screenslaver minifigure, and instead of having a black head underneath to avoid spoilers, there is a printed face that is definitely Winston. No idea what LEGO was doing there. These came out well before the film released, and I certainly did think that I walked into a big spoiler when I saw it. There was also a Brick minifigure for some reason. I know why they didn't do a big fig like Hulk in a junior set, and I guess scaling would have been off if they did, but they should have just done Void instead. She had a bigger role. These builds all do look to be in the same vein as a Batman or Spider-Man Juniors build that released at the same time. And being that only 3 construction sets released, I'm sure LEGO felt the money they left on the table when this went on to be one of the highest grossing films of all time. But then again, this was right after Infinity War, and LEGO did not mess around when it came to that one. They were covered in other avenues as the LEGO Group's attempt to cash in on the Funko Pop craze in the 2010s inspired them to make LEGO Brickheads, with a Mr. Incredible and Frozone 2-pack releasing at this time, despite Frozone not showing up in any of the sets. And while not made of physical bricks, there was a LEGO The Incredibles game from TT Games which released. This is now the second video of mine talking about this somehow. And while it covers the 2 films in the franchise, the most interesting thing to me is the inclusion of characters from every film the studio had put out by that point. Something I appreciate because this wasn't the kind of thing you'd see back then, and I haven't seen it since. There's always some film getting disincluded, but here we have a playable LEGO Spot in this game somehow. Edna Mode also got a polybag, and this figure looks super cursed. And it's funny that they even made her, considering that in the following year, a second series of Disney collectible minifigures released with Frozone and a new updated Edna. With 2019, we had another sequel on the horizon, Toy Story 4, but the Juniors line came to an end in 2018, so luckily for fans, each set was released in their 4+ line, which is basically the same exact thing. As the CMF buzz and the appearance of Woody in the LEGO Incredibles game would warn us, there were no longer going to be molded heads on these characters and tall legs and arms for Woody and Jesse, which caused a stir. I remember being very confused about it, and to this day I don't like how they brought back the tall legs after this for Avatar, and themes such as The Simpsons could resume their identity as a theme with intricate head molds, but taking a step back, it really isn't the worst. I think Duke Kaboom and Bo Peep look really good, and again Buzz translated quite well. I just think that if this line kept that previous identity, we could have gotten something better for Ducky, Bunny, and Forky. Gabby could go either way though, honestly. There's a chance she would have been way too creepy with a new head. Seeing the Cars 2 to Cars 3 builds go down in quality was nothing compared to the previous Toy Story sets to the Toy Story 4 ones though. I really don't want to knock the team behind these since they were restricted to being 4+, but calling this thing a thrill coaster is laughable. I do think that the Woody and RC one was a nice rework of a previously done idea, and it still worked with the fourth entry. And the Duke Kaboom stunt set successfully does what it sets out to do. The other ones just highlight so many problems with the scaling that didn't happen in 2010, and it yet again limited appeal to more audiences. As a kid, there were a lot of sets I mainly got for the minifigs, but I can't even see myself going for these ever. Despite being a fan of LEGO and Pixar, it is of note that these sets obviously aren't made for me, and I'm sure people will be nostalgic for some of them in a decade from now. It is just weird that despite hamming it up on the carnival aspect of the film in most of these, they didn't make a carousel. Back in the 2010 line, they would have taken that idea and made a grand one, the type LEGO only makes once every 5 years. It is just really odd seeing how this theme warped into this. A few years went by after this and we didn't get anything. Then things started ramping up in 2022 and we've had some pretty consistent releases since then. Towards the beginning of the year, there were a few more Brickheads released, Woody, Buzz, and Bo Peep. I didn't talk about it too much with The Incredibles, but I never found these to be all that appealing. I feel like they're a step down from Funko offerings, or other vinyl figures for that matter, and a tad bit more restrictive. We got the only other set to include Mini Doll Merida releasing in 2022 with Aurora, Merida, and Tiana's Enchanted Creations, which are essentially brick-built containers. You build little jewelry boxes and whatnot. Merida's is designed to be a pencil holder, but as a tiny castle build, it's honestly a better one than the last. With the summer 2022 release of Lightyear, we got a few sets, and these are honestly some standouts. They were each a bit overpriced based on the piece count, but the quality is there. They were able to capture different scenes in the film with a wide array of minifigures in just 3 sets. One of these was even a 4+ set, though it surprisingly doesn't feel limited by that. It just happens to be the smallest set and has a pretty good Cyclops build. I think that the XL15 is definitely the showstopper here. LEGO loves making starships, and this one is a great replication at a pretty accurate minifigure scale. On to 2023, we got a plethora of releases as LEGO was a major partner in the Disney 100 merchandise push. The beginning of the year started with some new Brickheads. We got 2 2-packs, one with Wall-E and Eve, and one which includes only one Pixar character, having Merida paired with Moana, which is just a 2010s princess pack, I guess. I do really like the design of Wall-E here. The boxy style of Brickheads works especially well with him. There was another Duplo set. Honestly, not sure why I bother mentioning. I have nothing to talk about here, and I think I missed some with Cars 3 and Toy Story 4, but the real kickoff to the Disney 100 line started with our third and most recent to date Disney collectible minifigure series. Per usual, there isn't much Pixar representation here, though we did get our first Coco minifigures with Miguel and Ernesto de la Cruz, and I suppose a Dante, though unfortunately no new molded piece for him. I think that the Ernesto de la Cruz was one of the best in the line though, with the monochromatic look just making it a well-designed minifigure. There was a Disney Celebration train set which included Woody alongside some other Disney characters, and we got a set that's been highly requested for over a decade with the Fredricksen household, or as it was labeled, the Up House. This set was a constant contender on LEGO Ideas, though it never got approved. The version they ended up making is a bit more affordable than I'm sure many older collectors may have wanted, since it's not fully enclosed, opting for the dollhouse approach. Though color and shape-wise, it's a great little display piece, and it comes with some great Carl and Russell minifigures as well as a perfect new Doug mold. With how much merchandise Up generates year after year, I'm sure this one was one of the higher sellers. I have seen many people buy multiple of these just so they can make a bigger version of the house as well, as it is just a memorable piece of film imagery. Another set entitled Disney Duos released, which included 4 properties, one of which being our first Finding Nemo representation, with there being a brick-built Nemo and Squirt, which are 2 nice little builds. I think it's quite the stretch to call these 2 a duo since they're on screen together for like 5 seconds at the end of the first movie, but you could look at them as 2 of the more merchandisable characters from the movie, I guess. I wish they did just sell these duos separately because I probably would have got these 2. And I think all except the Pocahontas duo would have sold well, maybe even better in their own packaging. And finally for 2023, there was a decorational art set called 100 Years of Disney Icons, in which you could build all sorts of little mosaics and put them all together in a picture frame. Some of the options for builds given in the instructions were Pixar. They covered different franchises and imagery from within these movies, with our first nods to Luca, Ratatouille, Monsters Inc., and Turning Red in brick form here. In 2024, we got what I've seen many dub the worst set of the year with the Inside Out 2 release, Mood Cubes, which is like displayable cubes, each displaying more of those little mosaics, this time of our 9 main emotions. with a very tiny build of a console and a mini doll of joy and what I believe is called a micro doll of anxiety, with 2 little mind workers on the side. It's a very weird set, and it's been warming shelves for the better part of a year at this point, which is quite unfortunate for the brand. It's pretty baffling they even took this approach for this set. Joy being a mini doll isn't the worst thing ever, though it is weird that any IP with a female lead seems to get this treatment. But Joy's character design does lend itself to this kind of molded piece. It would just kind of make it impossible to do most of the other emotions. The style they did for anxiety isn't bad either. It really is just such a nothing set. And after the movie went on to be the highest grossing of the year, I'd be interested in seeing which company was more disappointed in this release, Disney or Lego, and who's to blame for it turning out like this. Alongside mood cubes, there was a triple pack of brickheads for joy, sadness, and anxiety, and a separate triple pack for Carl, Russell, and Kevin. And yeah, it's more brickheads, and once again, another Duplo set. It has Mac and just Mac, and I think that's kind of cool. Towards the end of the year, there was an animated series of shorts going over a few of these properties we've seen represented in various ways, with the Pixar Bricktoons. And if you've ever seen any other Lego animated shorts, you're getting pretty much what you'd expect. That brings us to 2025, as we're over halfway through the year now. Not everything has been announced, but there are some rumors, and I have some forward-looking thoughts. Starting off though, towards the beginning of the year, we got a new Brickheads of Red Panda May. I assume we're just going to get a new Pixar Brickheads until Lego phases out the line at this point. I guess they sell pretty well though. They don't really release too many a year from what I can see, so Disney and even Pixar make up a decent percentage of releases. As a given, Duplo had another Cars set. There was also a tie-in to Toy Story's 30th anniversary with the Celebration Train and RC car. It's the same style as the Disney 100 train that Woody showed up in, but I'm not sure why they didn't have a train car for each of the movies with that being the case. Because this is all from the first movie, except Jessie is here, so it's not just celebrating the 1995 release of the first film. That being said, Bo Peep's classic attire works really well here. This is the 3rd RC we've gotten, and I hate to see that he's never looked worse. But for the rest of the set, as a 4+ release, it gets the job done, and it had a fine idea behind it. And finally, while I've yet to see it for myself in person, what I'd probably say is the best Pixar set released, as mentioned at the beginning of the video, Luxo Jr. I really just love this build. I've seen the videos going over the many Easter eggs to the film releases of the studio, which adds a lot of character to the build, but it honestly doesn't even need any of that to be a standout set. This is the first 18+ set released for the brand, and with that, it was made with collectors in mind, and it's a breath of fresh air to see. As going through the releases thus far, there have been a whole lot of ups and downs for movie tie-in merchandise, and just for Lego's status as a construction toy company. Both these brands are able to be appreciated by people of all ages all around the world, and as LEGO has been attempting to market to adults more and more for the last decade or so, they've been choosing more properties that strictly cater to them, with more intricate builds that children couldn't even possibly play with. So even as I've knocked some of these newer releases, children need something to play with, and these are brands that attract them to the company. While I say I want these big 18+ sets, I honestly couldn't even keep up with it if they put out major releases month after month. Though I think there are a lot of options as the market has been untapped up until now. There is a rumored 18+ set releasing in September, set to be WALL-E and Eve. Nothing is confirmed and there isn't even leaked pictures or anything, but that would be nice for anyone who missed the idea set, and maybe this is a sign that the brickheads of them was a major seller. There's no confirmation of this yet, but following the pattern, we can make an educated guess that new sets will release alongside Toy Story 5 next summer, and just because sequels are what they trust, Incredibles 3 and Coco 2 will probably get something too. But that's thinking way down the line. There have been a lot of LEGO idea submissions for different Pixar concepts over the years. Now that Luxo Jr. is coming out, they might steer away from Pixar for a year or two. But there was one person who kept achieving support for a Ratatouille set, being Gusteau's, and it was a deeply intricate build that they kept modifying and it didn't get approved. And that's honestly a shame because something like that would work really well, especially in a modular style. I have a few ideas for new 18+ sets that I feel could be on the table, knowing LEGO's track record, considering they love doing large-scale vehicles. The Pizza Planet truck, the Incredible, and Lightning McQueen all in the $100 to $200 price range would probably be big sellers. I'd love to see a collectible minifigure line just focusing on Pixar. It could be just one of their franchises, as something like Inside Out could work quite well, or a mishmash of different movies. I think they'll eventually do a Fredrickson House remake that's a lot bigger and detailed, and I'd love to see a micro-scale version of Radiator Springs or something like that. There really are a ton of options for them, but I get that they need some marketing reason to make a lot of these, whether it be an anniversary of a film or a new release in the franchise. But I hope these companies can realize how moving not only in this direction, but in catering to everybody in this regard can be mutually beneficial. Quick update that came out after all of this was recorded, a new set based on Lightning McQueen is being rumored as it's shown up in some listings, coming from their Speed Champions line, which has been seeing more and more licensed properties like James Bond and the Fast and the Furious as of late. It's not quite that larger scale that I predicted, though that's still possible later down the road. It is, however, exciting to already see further development in these collaborations though. This video was really long, like probably way too much information for me to be giving out since this isn't even a LEGO channel, but I hope somebody somewhere got something out of this. This kind of continues my trend of discussing the use of Pixar in other forms of entertainment, I suppose, as we recently looked at video games utilizing their IP. And it helps us understand these films as a business beyond the box office in these ancillary markets. I'd like to know what you all think of these sets. If you're just a Pixar fan, just a LEGO fan, both or neither, and you put this video on for some reason. And if you're interested in either of these, how would you like to see them expand in the years to come? Thank you so much for watching, everybody, and tuning in all the way to the end here. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, feel free to hit that subscribe button. It would go a long way. And I'll see you in the next video as always. Goodbye.